This episode is brought to you by Hasa. Liquid is clearly better. Liquid chlorine is the highest purity, works immediately, has no added cyanuric acid or calcium, and it will leave your pool safe, clean, and clear. And by the bottom feeder professional grade battery powered vacuum system. It sucks to clean pools, so cleaning pools sucks less. Get $100 off with code DVB100.
This episode is brought to you by Skimmer, the #1 pool service software in North America. With Skimmer, you can streamline your schedule, grow your revenue, and keep your customers coming back with 5-star service. Whether you're a one-person operation or an established team, Skimmer is your partner in success. Visit getskimmer.com/poolguy to try Skimmer for free for 30 days.
The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show.
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to cover some reasons why a pool may not be holding chlorine. And I'll cover some reasons that are typical and some reasons that are kind of not very typical, but you may run into out there, especially during the summer season. Are you a pool service pro looking to take your business to the next level? Join the Pool Guy Coaching Program. Get expert advice, business tips, exclusive content, and get direct support. From me, I'm a 35-year veteran in the industry. Whether you're starting out or scaling up, I've got the tools to help you succeed. Learn more at swimmingpoollearning.com. One of the misnomers, I think, is that if you have a good cyanuric acid level in the pool, 50 to 80 parts per million, let's say, then you shouldn't have any problems with the chlorine zeroing out in the pool. And that's just not simply the case, especially in the summertime when the water temperature is heated up. Let's say the water temperature is at 90 degrees. It's 110 degrees out there. The UV index is at 10, and the sun is just beating down on the pool all day long. If you're adding just the regular amount of chlorine that you always add to the pool, even if you have a good cyanuric acid level, it's going to burn off much faster than you think. I had someone email me one day, and they had a 30,000-gallon pool, and they were in Texas, and it was middle of summer, really hot, high UV index, and he said he was adding a gallon of liquid chlorine to his pool every day. He was buying the chlorine at a pool store, adding a gallon a day, and it was still zeroing out every day. And I told him that's not unusual with the weather conditions. By the way, his cyanuric acid level was fine. I think it was like at 50 parts per million. And it's just one of those things where even if you have everything by the book with the variables of the weather, it really doesn't work out that way. So you have to kind of bend a little bit to the environment. And then when you're in one of these high summer heat waves with really high temperatures, high UV index, yes, the cyanuric acid will protect the chlorine to a point, but it's still going to burn off a lot faster than if it was 80 degrees and the water temperature is in the 70s. You're not going to have as much burn off as you would have when it's 110 with a high UV index. So keep that in mind, that a lot of environmental factors like the weather really do affect the free chlorine level rapidly, and you may be adding a lot more chlorine than you normally would be adding, and kind of scratching your head. It's not really a mystery. It's just that it's just really blazing hot out there, and the chlorine, even though it has cyanuric acid, is not protecting it. Since I'm talking about cyanuric acid, a lot of times the reason why the chlorine is not holding in the pool is that there's too little cyanuric acid. Now, I know that everyone's afraid of having too much cyanuric acid in their pools, 100, 200 parts per million. But there's an opposite spectrum where customers have maybe 20 or 30 parts per million in the pool, and that's not effective either. Because the old rule of thumb is that for every part per million of cyanuric acid, it'll protect the chlorine part per million level. So let's say, for instance, you have 30 parts per million of cyanuric acid in the pool. You're only going to protect the chlorine up to 3 parts per million, I should say. So if you're adding a gallon of liquid chlorine, most of that is going to be unprotected because it only protects it up to 3 parts per million. And if you raise the pool to 10 parts per million, within like 3 or 4 hours, 7 parts per million will burn off out of the pool because it's not being protected by the low cyanuric acid level. Now, if you raise the cyanuric acid to 50 parts per million, then you're going to protect that chlorine level up to 5 parts per million. If you raise it up to 80, you'll protect it up to 8 parts per million. But when you start getting into the 100, 150, 200, it has kind of the opposite effect that you would think it would have. It actually will require you to add more chlorine to the pool to maintain that pool. And that's why a lot of times the pool's not zeroing out. You're at 8 or 9 parts per million, but you still have algae forming in the pool because the cyanuric acid level is too high in the pool. And that's because the formula that Bob Lauer came up with is actually telling in the fact that too much cyanuric acid actually interferes with the chlorine's ability to work properly in the pool. And this formula is that the free chlorine level needs to be at 7.5% of the cyanuric acid level in the pool. So if your cyanuric acid level is at 100 parts per million, you're going to need about 8 parts per million of free chlorine for the chlorine to be effective. So there is an opposite end of the spectrum. If you have too little cyanuric acid, it's not going to protect the chlorine level or chlorine in the pool. And if you have too much cyanuric acid, it's going to make the chlorine ineffective in the pool. So there's a sweet spot. I think in most cases, 50 to 80 parts per million is a sweet spot for me for pools that I know there's a good amount of cyanuric acid to weather these hot weather storms and high UV index days, but not too much cyanuric acid where the chlorine is ineffective or you need to add a lot more chlorine to the pool to make it effective. Kind of go back a little bit to the first example with the person adding a gallon of liquid chlorine to his 30,000 gallon pool in Texas and it not holding effectively. And one of the mistakes that you can make during the season is that you're adding chlorine to a level that's not high enough to make it effective in the pool. Kind of keep that 7.5% formula in mind here. A lot of people will just add chlorine because they look at the bag and it says 1 pound of shock. Add this bag to raise it to 3 parts per million, whatever, and 10,000 gallons of water. So they'll just add 1 bag of shock. But if you have a 30,000 gallon pool, you technically need to add 3 of those bags for it to be effective because you have to multiply the 10,000 gallon baseline that all chemicals are based off of by the size of your pool. So if your pool is 20,000 gallons, adding 1 pound of cal hypo to that pool is not going to effectively raise the chlorine to where you want it because you'd have to actually add 2 bags of cal hypo or 2 1 pound bags of cal hypo to your pool. So basically there's a multiplier with chlorine to make it effective. Also, besides the cyanuric acid to free chlorine ratio, there's also the gallons of your pool water versus the 10,000 gallon dosing on the bag or liquid chlorine. So if you're going to effectively dose your pool, I really suggest using an app like the poolcalculator.com. You can go to my website, swimmingpoollearning.com, scroll down to the middle, and you're going to see the pool calculator app there. And this will allow you to put in the amount of gallons you have in your pool, and then it'll actually give you the exact dose of chemical, cal hypo, liquid chlorine, dichlor, whatever you're putting in the pool, to the point where it's going to be an effective level. So again, you can't underdose and expect the chlorine to hold in the pool, because if you have a 20,000 gallon pool, the chlorine is at 0, and you want to raise it to 5 parts per million, you may need more than just 1 pound of cal hypo in that pool to be effective. So underdosing is a big problem in the summertime, and I would say that you always want to err on too much chlorine instead of too little chlorine when you're adding it to the pool. And the Pool Guy Podcast Show has teamed up with UPA to bring you affordable, reliable liability insurance starting at just $64 a month. Get up to $2 million in coverage, and the members of my coaching group get an even lower rate. Protect your business and your peace of mind. Sign up with UPA today by clicking the link in the podcast description. Another problem is when the pool starts to get algae in the pool, it becomes a big problem, especially in the summertime. Now, it's not just the problem of algae in the pool, it's a problem of kind of this perpetual kind of downward cycle that happens with algae in the pool. I'll explain it like this. If the pool has algae forming in the pool and you kind of treat it but don't take it too seriously, what happens is the algae starts to bloom and get even worse in the pool. What happens next is you have to shock the pool with a lot more chlorine, and then at that point the filter is getting a lot of dead algae in the filter, and that means that the filter is not running correctly. And so even if you shock the pool without cleaning the filter now, you're still going to have algae in the pool, and the pool may still zero out because the algae is growing more rapidly than you can fight it. And so the algae becomes like a perpetual downward cycle here. And there's been many customers I've taken over their pool, like in July, late July, and they tell me that they couldn't use their pool all summer yet because they're fighting this algae problem that just won't go away. And so there's a lot of different things that go into this. When you have algae in the pool, there's factors, again, maybe too little cyanuric acid, the chlorine's not staying in the pool, maybe too much cyanuric acid, the chlorine's not being effective in the pool, and then the algae itself kind of perpetuates and grows and blooms and kind of gets worse and worse as the day goes by. Even in a 24-hour period, the pool can go from just having, some mustard algae on the deep end wall to the next day being completely full bloomed and turning kind of greenish. And I've seen this happen before. So algae is something serious, not a joke. And algae is a big contributor to the pool zeroing out in chlorine. And so my suggestion, of course, is that you attack the algae aggressively. If you have some spots in the deep end, bring the chlorine to 30 or 40 parts per million right away. Use that pool calculator app to dose the pool to that level. You also want to make sure that you use an enhancer, an algicide. So PoolRx is great, adding borates to 50 parts per million. Of course, using a phosphate remover would help as well. When you have algae in the pool, you may want to do a full phosphate treatment or just a maintenance phosphate treatment depending on the phosphate level in the pool. You can get phosphate test strips on Amazon and you can see how your phosphate level is in the pool. And phosphates are a problem, especially in the season in the pool, so you want to make sure you treat the pool for that. And if the algae was particularly bad, you also want to clean the filter or backwash the filter to make sure the filter is clean, because again, it's kind of a vicious cycle where the algae gets in the filter is now dirty, and the chemicals you're adding to the pool won't be as effective because of the dirty pool filter. And I kind of glossed over the phosphates right there, and I'll probably go a little deeper here so that you get an idea that phosphates are a big problem and a big contributor to zero chlorine. Now, phosphates gets into the water in a lot of ways. It can blow in from the wind. It could be some products you're using in the pool or household products getting into the pool. Whatever the source, once you have a phosphate level of over 500 parts per billion, in my opinion, you want to treat that phosphate problem right away because it just grows and gets worse because it's a really good food source for algae. And by eliminating that one food source, there's other food sources for algae, but that's the main food source in my opinion. And if you remove the phosphates out of the water, the algae doesn't have that food source anymore, and therefore the algae won't bloom or grow to a great extent. So if you notice that the chlorine is zeroing out, you may not have algae per se, it may just be a little murky, maybe not as clear as you would like the pool to be. Go ahead and do a phosphate test. You can get the phosphate test strips again on Amazon or your pool store. Put them in there, check the phosphate level, and if it's reading anything over 500 parts per billion, I would do a phosphate treatment. Now, there's different products you can use to do the phosphate treatment. If you wanted to really knock it out, the PR 10,000 by Arenda is a great phosphate treatment, but you have to do the full treatment, and you have to also clean the filter. If you just have a small amount of phosphates, you can get away with using phos-free and putting it in the skimmer and using a maintenance dose, and that eventually will destroy or actually eliminate the phosphates just to stay in the water. But sometimes a full phosphate treatment with the PR 10,000 is necessary, and that means you have to clean the filter more than likely, also as well as part of the treatment. But it'll definitely eliminate the phosphates in the water, and you should be able to maintain a good chlorine level after that. Now, I mentioned that there are some products you may be using that introduces phosphates to the water. There are some pool products that have it, some tile soaps and things like that do have phosphates that will be added to the pool water. There's also some products like the stain removers, like the Biodex Aquadex 50 or some other sequestering agents that actually will destroy the chlorine level in the pool. So be aware that a lot of these products will lower the chlorine level in the pool or even zero out the pool. I had this pool where it had some staining that was really bad, and I just figured more is better. This is in the early days when I was doing this, and more is actually not better. So I used a whole bunch of stain remover in the pool, and it zeroed out the chlorine level to where, after 3 weeks, I could not get a chlorine reading in this pool. I realized that I overdosed it with the stain remover, and it just probably had a negative chlorine reading in here at this point. So I had a really hard time bringing it back. So really don't overdo it or don't overdose the pool with the stain remover. If you use a quart of Biodex Aquadex 50, you should be fine. Just realize that the chlorine level is going to suffer when you use any kind of stain removing product, Hasa Super Stain Out, anything like that will affect the chlorine level in the pool. And just be aware of that fact that some products actually will lower the chlorine level in the pool. And if you're not aware of it, it is something that does happen. And this one's not quite as obvious, but I think it's worth mentioning, and that is not running the pool long enough for the chemicals to circulate and be effective in the pool. A lot of this has to do with variable speed pumps. A lot of customers don't like running their pool on a higher speed, which is okay. It's perfectly fine. You just have to run the pool longer. So there are some customers that think that 4 hours at 1800 RPMs and 3 hours at 2400 RPMs is fine for their 20,000 gallon pool. A lot of times circulation is the key. I've serviced some pretty large pools that were heavily used over the years that were heated during the summertime to like 85, 88 degrees. And really one of the most effective things that I did for these pools was run these pools 24 hours a day, like a commercial pool basically. And so if you have a variable speed pump, very easy to do. You can run it for like 23 and a half hours with it, on higher speeds, medium speeds, whatever. But as long as that pool is running 24 hours a day, it's going to circulate the water really effectively, circulate the chemicals, not too many dead areas in the pool where algae can form. And that long run time is the key for pools that are heavily used. So if you have pools on your route that, that are used really heavily during the summer, really boost that runtime up. And I'm not kidding, maybe 24 hours will do the trick in most cases. And just run those pools as long as you can, and that really is half the battle. The longer the pools are run, in my opinion, the less water quality issues you have and the less problems you have with chlorine zeroing out in the pool. Of course, all these other factors I mentioned, but the runtime is a factor that should also be noted and addressed. And the longer you run the pool, the better off you're going to be, definitely in the summertime as well. If you're looking for other podcasts, you can find those by going to my website, swimmingprolearning.com. On the banner, there's a podcast icon. Click on that for a drop-down menu of over 1,900 podcasts there. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great week. God bless. This episode is brought to you by Hasa, providing products that deliver clean, healthy water for every aspect of everyday life. The bottom feeder battery-powered vacuum system, portable, powerful, and only weighs 12 pounds. And Skimmer. Get Skimmer, America's #1 pool service software. Podcast listeners can try Skimmer for free at getskimmer.com/poolguy.